Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says trade talks with the U.S. are back on after he dropped a planned tax on U.S. tech providers. President Trump had called off the talks on Friday, saying the tax was an assault on the U.S. Now, earlier this month at the G7 meeting in Canada, both countries said they'd work toward getting a deal done by July 21st. Meanwhile, the president's pause on tariffs for most countries ends on July 9th. So that is just around the corner. The White House released this statement today on resuming trade talks with Canada, saying President Trump has once again leveraged the power of the American economy and the best and biggest in the world to deliver a victory for American industries and workers. So let's bring in Akin Oyedele, deputy editor on investing at Business Insider. Akin, thank you so much for making time for us on 24/7 today. Was it a surprise that the president initially called off the talks with Canada, and how do you expect things to go moving forward?
Thanks for having me. Well, it wasn't that much of a surprise because we know that this is a president who is, I think by now we expect him to be unpredictable. And so that kind of erases the element of surprise when that kind of an announcement is made. But, you just read out the White House's statement, and it is true that Canada balked. And now the White House can say that it has saved some of the biggest U.S. tech companies a couple of $1 billion in taxes that would have gone to the Canadian government. So going forward, I do expect the U.S. and Canada to resume talks, and we'll see what comes of those. We know that some of the deals that were announced with, for example, the UK and China, were more frameworks of a deal than an actual deal that addressed the core issues. So we might see that again with Canada, where there is some sort of announcement of an agreement, but with a lot of core issues between both countries still outstanding.
Yeah, Akin, you just talked about how it's not a surprise with the president because he tends to go back and forth with his decisions. But we know the president says he does not plan to extend his July 9th pause on global tariffs. Do you think he will actually stick to that? Because again, July 9th is just around the corner. And if so, what can we expect will happen?
So that's a great question, and I wish I knew either way. We did not expect the 90-day pause that we're in right now. So it's hard to predict this president one way or another. But, we do know that uh, between now and then, there are only so many deals that can be done. And
Right.
so what we might see is that countries that are more willing to play ball with the US get some kind of an extension or fair treatment, while others get the gauntlet handed down to them on the ninth.
Yeah, you're right there. No telling one way or another. Okay, so as Trump's big, beautiful bill nears passage, the Congressional Budget Office says it will raise the deficit by more than $3 trillion over the next decade. What is your take on the potential impact of that? We're talking $3 trillion.
That's correct. It's significantly more than the House version. And the White House and economists say that they disagree, but I think the consensus of economists agree that tax cuts typically don't pay for themselves, and so we are going to see a hit to the deficit. Um, as far as the economic impact of that, that remains to be seen. We did have the first round of tax cuts did eat into the deficit, but the economy is still in fairly good shape, and so we'll see whether or not it's $1 trillion, and so it sounds like a base carry number, but at the end of the day, if it's putting more money in the pockets of regular Americans, then
Right.
the consumer spending that comes of that may actually counteract some of the worst fears of how it hits the economy.
All right, we shall wait and see. Akin Oyedele with Business Insider, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate your time.